Hello, everyone. So just a few wee things before we get started and before I introduce Gabriella. As you can see, the chat box has been disabled for this presentation simply because we have so many people enrolled and attending tonight that it would have been impossible for us to manage the chats as well. But the Q&A, the section for asking questions is still open. Should anyone want to ask a question, we'll answer it at the end, or Gabriella will answer it at the end, not me. So there are 1.5 CEUs available for this presentation, and as usual, they will be available. You'll get the alert, so you click in the attendance check as they pop up. So as say, any questions you have for Gabriella upon her presentation, you can just pop it in the Q&A section, and we'll get to it at the end. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Gabriella Barrientos to host our webinar this evening. Gabriella is my PhD student at the Centre of Behaviour Analysis here at Queen's University Belfast, and her research focus has been in the area of developing clinical recommendations for transgender and autistic youth within a behaviour analytic framework. Gabriella is a board-certified behaviour analyst with vast experience across a number of clinical and non-clinical settings with many different clients. Her practice values centre on the affirmation of transgender youth and intersectionality. She is the co-owner of Twice Consulting Services, LLC, and director of Twice Affirming Behavioural Services, LLC, which provide affirming behaviour analytic services for clients meeting the intersection of LGBTQAI+ and autism, as well as parent coaching. Gabriella is also a certified diversity executive, a credential that is designed to strategically position an organisation to remove systemic barriers to inclusion, lead culture change, and transform the brand. So tonight, Gabriella will be talking about how we as behaviour analysts should interrogate our assumptions and how gender training and the gender binary impact behaviour analytic practice. And as I said, 1.5 CEUs are going to be available for this webinar, and the alerts will pop up throughout. So just click on your attendance check. So it's my pleasure to hand over to Gabriella for what is bound to be a really interesting and informative webinar. So Gabriella, it's over to you, and thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you, Nichola. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome to Interrogating Our Assumptions, How Gender Training and the Gender Binary Impact Behavior Analytic Practice. As already introduced, I'm Gabriella. Feel free to scan this QR code from your computer. You'll be able to connect with me on my socials, my website, everything's kind of available by scanning there. I'm happy to answer questions later if anyone wants to contact me via email or through my website. Primarily, my practice is applied behavior analysis through an anti-racism lens. And today we're going to be talking about how to create a framework within our supervision. So these are supervision CEUs. And within our supervision, how we can create and support affirming practices for our clients who are part of the LGBTQ+ community, our colleagues, fellow professionals, and how you can support your supervisees in that. Before we get started, I wanted to offer a land acknowledgement. I know that we're meeting remotely and across the globe, but I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement for where I currently am. So I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathering on the traditional homeland of the Muskogee Creek Nation and the Eastern Cherokee, the Georgia Cherokee. These lands were the site of residence for numerous Indigenous people. For exchange and for meeting, we honor and respect those people in their connection to the land on which we're gathering to learn and educate. Further, I want to offer a labor acknowledgement that I respectfully acknowledge the enslaved people, primarily of African descent, who provided exploited labor upon which most of the country was built with little to no recognition. Today, we're indebted to their labor and the labor of many Black and brown bodies that continue to work in the shadows for our collective benefit. I wanted to note my presenter values, my researcher values with the research and support that I've been doing and building through Queen's. So I hold advocacy values which center the affirmation of transgender youth. I'm an advocate. I foster diversity, equity, and inclusion of historically marginalized and underrepresented populations. I embrace allyship behavior, and all work centers the belief that transgender rights are human rights, and affirmation of one's gender identity is suicide prevention. Some mutual agreements for the space. I always put these in any presentation that I do. Initially, a note that this is a brave space. And I would also encourage folks to create mutual agreements within your supervision with the people that you are supervising, and discuss what those look like for the spaces that you're cultivating. I always include a brave space rather than a safe space. And the reason for that is because it's really impossible to present and provide a safe space for individuals that are at the most risk and the most historically marginalized. In presentations like this, the people that are at risk for harm are the transgender, gender nonconforming, non-binary community, because we're talking about their lived experience. So I always say we want to cultivate a brave space where we're going to be brave enough to lean into being uncomfortable, that we are going to be willing to unlearn as much as we're willing to learn, that we're going to reserve the right to change our minds, because you might hear some things during this presentation that may challenge your worldview. And you are here to interrogate your assumptions. That is the title of the presentation. I also want to encourage folks to be responsible for your own learning outside of this presentation. Look things up, research things, spend more time learning. This is definitely not going to give you all the information that you need to create affirming environments for the LGBTQ+ community, but it's definitely a place where we can start. And then we want to focus on impact over intention. So I always say that whenever I do a mutual agreement, that I think anyone coming into this training has very, very good intentions. What we want to focus on is our impact when we're working and when we're creating our supervision framework, and we want our intentions to match that impact. So this is a really great way to kick off your first supervision with your supervisees, is creating mutual agreements and really breaking down what those pieces are. And helping folks recognize that being given information that might make them uncomfortable doesn't make them unsafe. However, we can very much cultivate spaces that are unsafe for the most historically marginalized community members. So just some notes on lingo here. Affirming environment, I have said that a couple times. So the definition for affirming environment is an environment that provides affirmation of the individual, that they are a person of worth, that they have a place to belong, that they are in a place that is supporting them and enables their occupation over time and their performance over time. That is what an affirming environment does. So our goal is to cultivate that within our supervision of our clients that we are working with our supervisees that we are working with families that you might be working with, colleagues and coworkers, whatever, however you're walking into this space, that is the goal, is to create an affirming environment. So just a couple notes here on sex versus gender. So there is a difference between sex and gender, and they do not equal or equate the same thing. So biological sex is a medical term. It usually refers to chromosomal, hormonal, anatomical characteristics that are used to refer to an individual. Usually it's called sex assigned at birth, meaning that a child is born, the doctor looks at the body parts and goes, it's usually either boy or girl. Another biological sex is intersex that we don't hear enough about. However, those are what we call sex or biological sex. Gender refers to behavior, identity, norms, and roles. That's what our social and cultural role of maybe we've been given within a society. It's not based solely on genetics or sex differences. And then we also have gender identity. So that's our internal perception of who we are. It's how we label ourselves. It's maybe how we align or how we don't align. Most of the time it's convoluted with biological sex, but those are two very different things. And then the gender binary is this idea that there are only two genders and everyone has to be one of those two genders. So we want to dismantle the gender binary. And that's also within our presentation today. Cisgender and transgender, if you've not heard these before, you're going to learn about those today. So a cisgender person describes someone who they were assigned a certain sex at birth, and that is how they identify. I am cisgender. I hold cisgender privilege. Basically, that means I was born. The doctor looked at me and looked at my body parts and said, it's a girl, and that is how I identify. A transgender person is someone who doesn't identify with the sex that was assigned to them at birth. So what we also have here is non-binary, and this might be a newer term for some and maybe not for others, but non-binary refers to the identity that can mean many different things for many different people. Some experience non-binary gender identity as neither male or female. Some feel it's beyond gender. Some feel as if it's gender fluid. Some are agender, which means that they don't identify as any gender. Some feel it's a third gender, and for some people, it's something else entirely. So it's very, very individualized. I've been working with transgender and autistic kids for the last 6-7 years now, and no individual's definition of gender binary for themselves is necessarily the same. It's very individualized. Oops. This is a great image if you're newer to these terms that kind of helps you understand. So basically what it is we have, if you think of transgender as an umbrella, you have some folks that fall in the binary transgender identity where they might be a trans man or a trans woman. And then non-binary can have many, many different types of gender identities. Currently, there are 72 documented genders in research. However, there are many, many more culturally that our research hasn't really caught up to yet. I wanted to make a note about two-spirit gender identities. This is something that we don't speak about enough, but it's something that if we are working to decolonize our work, you start learning about two-spirit identities. And this is the complex indigenous understanding of gender identity and gender roles. It's highly tied to spirituality. There's a long history of gender diversity in indigenous cultures. So transgender identity is not new. It's really from the start of time in the indigenous cultures. We had two-spirit people. In the 1990s, this term was kind of agreed upon by the indigenous tribes in Canada and the United States, or Turtle Island as it was once known. And they kind of settled on the use of the word two-spirit. Each indigenous culture has its own language supporting two-spirit identities. What a lot of people don't know is that prior to colonization, prior to land being stolen and weaponized, two-spirit people were viewed as leaders in their community. It was viewed that because they were transgender, then they had a greater understanding of the human experience, and that set them to lead. So if you think about the history of colonization and stealing land, one of the ways that was done was by villainizing the leaders. And that's what happened, and that's kind of where transphobia was really kind of stepped up in terms of how we treated our two-spirit Indigenous LGBTQAI plus community members. This is another thing that can be scanned. It's a gender sexuality terminology fluency tool. So I have this here. I created this along with my business partner, where it is a tool that you can use to get more fluid with the LGBTQAI plus terminology. If you're not familiar with how to use they, them pronouns, or gender neutral language, this is a way that you can build that, and it's completely free. So go ahead and scan that QR code and you'll be able to practice that later. So some notes that I wanted to talk about is the current political and cultural relevance of why we're talking about this topic. So I'm going to issue a trigger warning first before I move into the next few slides. We will be talking about LGBTQAI plus anti-legislation, primarily within the United States. We're also going to be talking about the death by suicide rate in expansive gender youth. So please take care of yourself over the next few slides. Feel free to opt out. Obviously, everyone's camera and microphone are disabled at the moment, but feel free to step away if you need to, and then access the help resources that are there for you. So what's happening in the United States? We have currently 513 anti-transgender bills that have been introduced to law. So this is, since 2021, this has incredibly tripled, almost quadrupled in terms of the number of bills that have been introduced into law. If anyone's joining us from the UK or in Europe, a new report is finding that the UK is the worst place in Europe for trans people. So what kind of bills are we tracking? There's education, sports, healthcare, civil rights, bathroom, employment, incarceration, child abuse, performance, marriage, birth certificates, the military. If you use Google and put in 2024 anti-transgender bill tracker, you will be able to pull up a website where I got this from, and you can click on any state that you might be in. Or if you're telehealth, make sure you're looking at where your clients are and figure out what kinds of bills are being introduced into law, which ones have passed. So keep in mind, if a bill has been introduced, it doesn't mean that it is law yet. So some people are making changes that they don't need to make changes yet, at least from a legal standpoint. So that's something that you can use and look at. A lot of the states that we often hear about, that we often talk about, are Georgia, Florida, Texas, North Carolina. But I wanted to pull a bill from Oklahoma and just talk very briefly about that. If anyone is in Oklahoma, unfortunately, we don't have anyone who can say, yes, that's me in the chat box. But there was a bill that was introduced for felony charges brought against medical or healthcare professionals who provide gender affirming procedures on anyone under the age of 26, not even minors, under the age of 26. Any referral for gender transition for anyone under the age of 25 would result in revocation of a license. So this should be extremely concerning for any behavior analyst. Oklahoma is a behavior analyst licensed state. In the last 7 years, I have exclusively been working with transgender and autistic youth, and I've been leveraging my privilege and ability to make recommendations to support my clients using my initial assessments, using my 6-month treatment plans, using my BIPs, my behavior intervention. And while I can't make an official referral to a medical professional for gender affirming medical care, I do write parent goals that include parents following my recommendations, and occasionally those include appointments with gender affirming medical professionals or gender affirming mental health counselors. And those are goals that I do write into reports and take data on as parent goals. Before I move on, I want to point out that this bill is targeting trans people not just under the age of 26. So most of the rhetoric that we repeatedly hear as justification for preventing affirming transgender children is because they're children and they need to be protected. But I think this bill demonstrates that that goal is less about protecting children and more about controlling the autonomy of people who are making medical decisions for themselves. Arizona is another state that we see a lot of bills coming into. So in Arizona, the state requires that practitioners be registered by a psychologist examination board. So this is also another state that is going to require some sort of licensure. But it's also a state where any employee of a school district or a charter school can knowingly misgender students unless given written permission by the parent. So this would assume, one, that the child is out to their parents and that the parent is able to provide permission or advocate for their child to be affirmed in school. Regardless, it also says that even if the parent has signed permission for a child to be using gender affirming language or the pronoun. Any employee can disregard that if it contradicts their personal religious or moral convictions. So this is something that should be extremely concerning for behavior analysts working with children, because most children are in schools. Some behavior analysts are employees of school districts. Wyoming. Wyoming is another behavior analytic licensure state. In Wyoming, a person can be found guilty of felony child abuse with 10 years of imprisonment if a person engages in gender affirming medical procedures. So I want to take a few minutes to dispel some of the myths and hopefully help folks interrogate their assumptions when it comes to gender affirming medical care for minors. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about puberty blockers. Puberty blockers are safe. They were approved by the FDA to treat precocious puberty in cisgender kids. So remember what cisgender means. That means that you were assigned a certain sex at birth, and that is how you identify. So it was approved by the FDA to treat precocious puberty in cisgender youth in 1993, and they cited minimal side effects with a high efficacy rate. 30 years later, puberty blockers remain a gold standard treatment for precocious puberty in cisgender youth. So typically this is given to cisgender children who start developing puberty at very young ages, and it's been determined that they aren't emotionally or mentally ready for those changes, and that it's not healthy for them to start going through puberty under the age of 8 or 9 years old. So what they do is they prescribe puberty blockers, which are monitored by healthcare teams. And the exact same procedures are used for transgender youth. You are monitored by healthcare teams for any side effects or complications. And they're prescribed prior to starting puberty, usually right before you've started puberty. The only non-reversible effect for a minor is natural puberty. So puberty blockers are prescribed at the outset of puberty to serve kind of as a pause button. It gives you more time, the child more time to explore their gender, and they're also fully reversible. So once a person stops taking puberty, natural puberty will resume with minimal long-term side effects if there are any. Puberty blockers are also life-saving. So previous studies have found that transgender and non-binary youth who are able to receive puberty blockers report positive psychosocial impacts. So there's an increase in well-being, decreased depression. The suicidality rate overall is reduced dramatically by 70%. I'm going to talk a little bit about gender affirming hormones, which are also safe for both adults and children. And this is, again, provided with supervision. So sometimes this is the next step after puberty blockers, where an individual is given either estrogen or testosterone to go into the type of puberty and the effects on their body that match the gender identity. Or it could be children who never had puberty, but they are going to start on gender affirming hormones, or HRT, hormone replacement therapy. And depending on how long the person is taking gender affirming hormones, those are also fully or partially reversible. So I usually tell people if they weren't reversible, we wouldn't need to keep taking them. This is something that's taken usually on a weekly or monthly basis. Transgender and non-binary people do not have surgery prior to the age of 18. There are very, very rare exceptions where you will see surgery at ages 16 or 17 years old. But those are done to reduce the impacts of significant gender dysphoria, significant anxiety, significant depression, and suicidality. So in most of the time, we do not see surgeries prior to the age of 18. It's very rare. And then my last note here that I just wanted to throw in regarding Arizona is that Arizona has redefined what an adult-oriented business is. And I decided to include this bill because I wanted to talk about the restriction of representation and the messaging that is happening for people who live at the intersection of expansive gender. and that we are starting to categorize that any instance where you are dressing or engaging or presenting in a way that is different than the sex that was assigned to you at birth, we are starting to categorize that as adult behavior. And then further, I wanted to note that there is a bill banning any kind of representation for gender identity and pronouns. So systemic power is being given to silence and control any content which promotes inclusivity. And I also want to highlight the weaponization of the concept that children are being groomed, and what this is starting to do to our assumptions when it comes to transgender people, and that we are essentially comparing transgender identities to pedophilia. So these are all things to keep in mind if you have a transgender RBT who works in homes, and what messaging the families of the children who work in those homes might be receiving. So these are all things that are really important for us to not only look at what our own assumptions are regarding transgender folks, but also the people that we are serving and the people that we are in charge of keeping safe. And you are, as a BCBA, 100% in charge of ensuring that your supervisees, that your RBTs, that the people that you are supervising are safe in the spaces that they are working. So I want to talk about minority stress. Minority stress is a well-documented condition that describes high levels of stress faced by people who are stigmatized as minority groups. And it comes through with a variety of factors. It also includes poor social support, low socioeconomic status, but it is well understood that minority stress is caused by interpersonal just prejudice and discrimination. And what we see with minority stress is something like this, where minority stress results in feeling like a burden. So feeling like a burden where everyone has to learn a new name to call me. Everyone has to learn how to remember to use different pronouns. I need to have access to a gender neutral bathroom. And it just feels like a burden just for you to live as the person that you are and to have some sort of dignity in the spaces that you are. And that results in depression and suicidal ideation. Minority stress also includes internalized homophobia and transphobia. And then high levels of concealment stress, where you're concealing your gender identity for the safety of your person, which results in major depression. So there are some extremely poor outcomes for LGBTQAI+ youth. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people. So that's any child ages 10 to 24, that is the second leading highest cause of death. For LGBTQAI+ youth, they are at a higher risk. So the Trevor Project estimated that 1.8 million LGBTQ youth, that's ages 13 to 24. So keep in mind, we might have RBTs that are still falling within this category. Seriously consider suicide each year in the United States. And one attempted suicide at least every 45 seconds. The National Survey on LGBTQAI+ mental health found that 45% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the last year. More than half of that number were transgender and non-binary. LGBTQ youth are 4 times as likely to attempt suicide than their peers. So it's extremely important that we keep in mind how important it is for us to create affirming environments as suicide prevention. There's a disproportionate impact on Black, Indigenous people of color. So those are our Native, Indigenous youth, Two-Spirit, Black identity. They report the highest risk of suicide. And that means that they live at the intersection of their racial and ethnic identity as well as their gender identity. That's called intersectionality. So the disparities are highest for ongoing oppression and trauma inflicted on Black, Indigenous people of color. In particular, Black, transgender, and non-binary youth report disproportionate rates of suicide in comparison to white LGBTQAI+ youth. 59% seriously considered suicide in the last year, 26% attempted in the last year. So a quick note on rainbow capitalism, or it's sometimes referred to as pinkwashing. So one of the things that I want folks to recognize is that Pride, I know that we are celebrating Pride, kicking Pride off here in May, even though Pride is every year in June. Pride is first and foremost a protest. It is first and foremost a opportunity for advocacy, for change, for systemic policy change, for engaging in things all year round. So rainbow capitalism or performative allyship are when we start seeing people putting pride flags up or showing the rainbow, or 1 month a year putting out in this content that usually is making them money without making any systemic change within their policies, their organizations. They're not hiring transgender, non-binary people. If they are hiring them, they're not creating spaces for them to be affirmed. So I really want us to create a supervision framework that is not performative allyship, that is absolutely founded in committed action. So one of the things that we have to do with our supervisees is help them understand some gender training. We need to do that within ourselves as well. And tying that in directly to behavior analysis, we can talk about learning history, which is any environmental event that has affected your behavior up until the present. It's how we've understood the world. It's what has shaped our worldview. It's what we explore in our past that enables us to gain insight into what are our current cultural values, what are our beliefs, what are our motivations that form society over time. That's what learning history does. So I have a couple polls that I'm going to put out for everyone. And what I'm going to do is the poll is going to show you a word, and it's going to ask you to select male or female. So I'm going to make the first poll visible. So go ahead and look at the word emotional. And how many of you immediately think male? How many of you immediately think female? I see the votes coming in. Thanks everyone for participating. Okay, so it seems like overwhelmingly something in all of our learning history has made us think overwhelmingly female. And this tends to be the case when I do this for most people. When I done this with some of my parents, when I do parent coaching and we talk about this, and I have families who start talking about, well, actually, no, now that I think about it, I should be selecting male from what my experience has been with the word emotional. But overwhelmingly, typically, we see female. Okay, so I'm going to hide this one. Thanks, everyone, for participating. And then here's going to be another one. So the word assertive. Oh, wow. People are really coming in quick now. Okay. So something in our learning history has has told us that it's either male or female that we're starting to put here. It's interesting. I'm seeing kind of an even split. Most of the time I see higher responses for male. But actually what I've started seeing more recently with my parent training is mothers especially will tell me, well, no, when it comes to protecting my child, I'm far more assertive than my husband is. And when I start looking at parents and how parents are advocating, they'll tell me it's mostly the mom that is doing this. It's mostly the female identified parent. So I'm wondering if people are starting to see a shift in their learning history and the things that have forced them to consider which gender identity might fall within assertive. Okay, so I'm going to hide that poll. And then I'm going to make this one visible. So cleaning. Okay, so overwhelmingly, cleaning seems to be a female-dominated activity. And that's typically what I see across most of my trainings that I do. So something in our learning history has created this thought process that this is a female-dominated activity. Okay, so I'm going to hide that. Thank you, everyone, for responding. Okay, so I'm going to make another one, pink. Okay, so again, overwhelmingly, we're seeing that the word pink seems to be female. It's been associated within our learning history as female. And that doesn't mean that the people who are responding female think only girls can wear pink. It just means that they recognize that in their learning history, that's the first thing that kind of pops into their mind. Okay, so I'm going to hide that now. And I'm going to make this one visible, the word muscle. Okay, so it looks like overwhelmingly the word muscle is associated with men. So again, that goes back to learning history. Okay, so I'm going to hide that. Thank you, everyone, for responding. Okay. Dominance. Okay, so it looks like overwhelmingly this word in our learning history is associated with male identities. Okay, I'm going to hide that. Oh, and it looks like, oh, I made territorial visible as well. Okay, so it looks like people were responding to that poll, which overwhelmingly, again, looks like male votes. Okay. Let me just make sure all of these are hidden now. Okay, so those are our polls. So here's the thing about learning history, and this is a really good activity that I would recommend that you try maybe with your supervisees, is just give them a bunch of words and ask them to kind of associate. What do you associate this with? Is it male? Is it female? And without needing to tell anyone, normally we can come up with, okay, the word muscle overwhelmingly seems to be associated with male identities versus female. So you can talk about learning history. You can do an entire training with your supervisees on what learning history is, just talking about gender training and how we know those things. We can talk about gender reveal parties and how those are starting prior to birth. Baseball or bows, nobody knows. It's a gender reveal party. Without anyone needing to tell us, we know that the baseball is for the boy and the bows are for the girl. And that's what that means. If anyone is old enough to remember when you would go to McDonald's and get Happy Meals, for kids, they would usually say, do you want a boy toy or a girl toy? And without any of us needing any sort of prompting, we can usually figure out that the boy toy is going to be a race car and the girl toy is going to be a unicorn or a doll. And that all comes into our gender training. We're further told that there's a gender binary by the type of restrooms available. It's male or female restrooms. And then we are asked to claim one of two gender binaries, even though there is a third biological sex of intersex. We are asked to claim that on any form that we might have to fill out. So this is really where gender training comes in, and why we exclude a lot of our gender non-conforming, gender non-binary, and transgender people. So really what has to happen is we have to go through a journey of unlearning what we've learned. And then we need to relearn new information. We have to repeat it over and over again, and then we share our learning. This is something that I show my supervisees when I'm working with them. And I talk about these are the kinds of things that we can expect to do in supervision, is to unlearn some things, to interrogate our assumptions, and then relearn new information. Some supervisor considerations. So one of the things that I do at the outset of supervision is I include a standard from the very beginning in my supervision contracts. So these are two things that I took from the contracts that I give my supervisees. So I tell them I feel passionately that behavior analysts can be used to address socially significant problems within our world. It's important for supervisees working directly under my credential to generalize their behavior analytic skills and apply philosophical doubt. So through supervision, you'll be expected to examine your own implicit bias so as to learn how to build an affirming environment for your clients and colleagues. In supervision, you're going to be expected to explore your learning history and challenge your perspectives. In supervision, we're going to be centering the impact on historically marginalized identities, and we're going to learn how to do better. It's often uncomfortable, yet we don't grow without moving outside of our comfort zone. And then I ask them to check the box on the contract that says, I understand this is an expectation of supervision for my personal growth and development. I also have them check a box that says, I understand I am responsible for my own learning. I understand that becoming an inclusive human who learns how to center impact on marginalized identities and generalize my advocacy to my daily behaviors is a cornerstone of social justice. I understand that intersectionality is vital to the safety and well-being of those that I serve. So this is at the very outset of supervision. Typically, your supervision contract is one of the very first meetings. Normally, what I do is I give folks the contract ahead of time. I let them review it, and then we sit down and we talk about it before they sign it. So we talk in detail that these are the things that we're going to be expecting in supervision. And of course, supervision is voluntary. If people are not ready for this, they don't have to move forward and work under my credential. However, I've never had that happen. I've always had supervisees that are really very excited to start that journey. Another thing that I do is I use a DEI tracker and competency log. So there's a QR code here for folks to scan. I helped the owner of the ABA Simplified company on Teacher Pay Teachers create this. I do not get any kickback on this. There's no monetary gain on my end. I just really wanted something that was easily accessible and also could be used within tracking their hours. So there is a tracker in this document where they can track their hours. There is a task list log where we are logging the task list items. And then there's also a DEI tracker where all of the things that I want to make sure I hit in supervision are logged with dates and times. So this is something that I use in supervision pretty much exclusively. And I recommend it to anyone. Like I said, I don't get any kickback from this. There's no monetary gain. I still purchase them. So even though I created and helped put this together, it's not mine. It belongs to the ABA Simplified team, but I highly recommend that. Some of the things that I also do is I ask my supervisees, what are your pronouns? I have that in the contract. I put that in there. And I give examples of what those look like. So I ask them, what are your pronouns? And I give examples. Is it she, her? Is it they, them? And I tell them that mine are she, her. I ask them, do you prefer that I use a different name than the one you're signing this contract with? Do you prefer that I use different pronouns with other people? Who can I use these pronouns around and with? So it might be a case where you have somebody who only wants to be using and be out in the safety and space of your supervision meeting. And then in other spaces, they're not out. So you're going to be using their birth name or their name that was assigned to them at birth versus their affirming new name. There might be some people where we aren't using all of their pronouns around people. I have clients where this is something that I have to remember when I'm working with them, where that time with me and them, where I'm working with that client, but in other spaces with other people, they aren't out. So I have to remember not to use that name or those pronouns. And again, this is right at the outset of supervision. So if you have supervisees that are coming in as cisgender, who have never heard of sharing pronouns before, this provides you a natural opportunity to explain to them why it's in your contract and why it's necessary and why it's needed. So I'm going to give some personal supervision experiences that I've experienced, and then talk a little bit about what I've done or what I've recommended in those instances. One of the things that I want to remind folks is Pride is an all-year event. It is first and foremost a protest. So I want to make sure that we are recognizing from the outset that it is not just the month of June that we should be celebrating the transgender and non-binary and LGBTQ plus community. We need to be creating affirming environments all year. So something that I experienced is I had an RBT come out as transgender after they were already presenting as their sex assigned at birth to everyone at work. So to their coworkers, to families, to clients. They were already presenting as the sex that was assigned to them at birth before they came out. So I want to note first how I worded that. Your language is very important. I said presenting as. That is the most appropriate way to refer and discuss periods of time prior to an individual coming out. You always want to use their affirming name and pronouns, even when you're discussing periods of time before they came out. This is something that I help my parents recognize or understand. So if they're telling me a story about 5 years ago, and they want to switch back to the old name or the old pronoun because that's how they were presenting then, nope, we are going to use the current name and the current pronoun because that's what's most appropriate. Of course, unless directed otherwise by the individual themselves. So no trans person used to be a man or used to be a woman. They were assigned male or female at birth. So in this particular case, I was asked to consult. It was a fellow BCBA have this situation that they were navigating. So what I recommended was open conversations with your RBT. That's essential. So the individual themselves are the one who are driving the coming out process. So ask them, do you want to come out to families, to coworkers, to clients? If this is the case, how do you want to do that? Do you want me as the BCBA to inform everyone for you? Do you want me to write a letter and have you look at it and then give it to the parents? Do you want to tell them directly yourself? And also think about what is the level of affirmation expected from each individual, from each family, from each client that person is working with. What can we expect? And if you're sitting there going, oh, I have no idea how they would respond to that, then I would say that you want to take a look at what your supervision practices are at the outset of working with families, because you should be able to deduce what level of affirmation or potential shock each individual family might be. And if you aren't, then you're probably practicing from an area of privilege, because you aren't seeing how they might react to that. So in this particular case, that RBT wanted to continue on all of their cases with the exception of one. There was one family that was agreed between the BCBA and the RBT that family would probably not be a safe space for that RBT to go into, and home for that RBT to go into. So what they did was they just immediately transitioned that person off of that home and replaced the hours without a gap in their pay schedule. So that is another thing to consider, is that if you are going to be replacing those hours, it needs to be done pretty much immediately. Otherwise, you set yourself up potentially for an issue of discrimination. Also, what I suggested is talk to HR and the Human Resources Department about what potential accommodations can be made. Typically, we have to bill with our legal name. So what kind of accommodations can be made if we need to be billing with the legal name as the RBT, however they're going with this name? And what, if any, kind of accommodations could be made there? And then also a protocol was worked out between the BCBA and the RBT if a situation had to be addressed. And they talked about that antecedently, is what is the worst case scenario for families, for unaccepting coworkers, and what is our plan if that's the case? I had another case where a child saw an example of an LGBTQ plus identity. So it could be in real life, it could be on TV, and the parent thinks that the child was, quote, influenced. So a very important piece of information for anyone who's working with autistic kids is to recognize that non-cisgender people, so that means transgender, gender nonconforming, anyone outside of cisgender people are 3 to 6 times more likely to be autistic. So this is an area where parental education is really needed. If we are providing parental education on autism diagnosis, I highly recommend that this statistic also be included for families. I believe that behavior analysts are uniquely positioned at a systemic level to offer parental education because when I say systemic, I'm talking about the nature of our profession includes funding for parent training. So this is what my research is on in my years of work. What I found is it's not only parents that need education, but also behavior analysts, where we all need to be interrogating our assumptions regarding gender and the gender binary. And it's also really a societal issue because it requires every individual to shift their worldview, to unlearn gender training. It's also a very specific scope. So what I'm going to say is if this is something you're navigating, reach out for mentorship and consultation because I've spent entire trainings on the topic itself, on the complexity of the nuance, specifically in the context of an autistic gender questioning child. So I had this parent that was just convinced that the child was confused. And the parent said, well, you know, the reason why I know this, they are confused is because I questioned them. And I said, well, how do you know you're a boy and you're not a girl? And the child scripted pretty much word for word a Reddit post that they had read. It was someone else's story. There were specifics in it that they knew was not the child's story. So the parent was like, absolutely, this cannot be real because all they're doing is copying somebody else's story. So I had to spend a lot of time in parent training with this parent. And I asked them, well, did you ever ask your child before how they knew that they were the sex that was assigned to them at birth? Did you ever ask any of your other children that question? Any of your other cisgender children, did you ever ask them, how do you know you're this gender? No, I never did that. And then I said, okay, well, I'm going to question you about your gender, and I want you to tell me. So then I started saying, you know, in every statement they made, I refuted it. You know, you're a woman because you menstruate. What about when you go through menopause and you stop menstruating? Do you stop being a woman? Well, no, of course not. Okay. And the women who never menstruate are still women, the cisgender women, or are they not women in your eyes? Oh, no, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm like, okay. So they're not less of a woman. No, of course not. Okay. Oh, you know, you're a woman because you have a vulva. Okay. So are women reduced to their genitals? Is that what makes us who we are? Oh, and she's like, no, of course not. No, it's awful when you put it that way. I'm like, okay. Oh, you're a woman because you like to cook and decorate? Okay, so if a man likes that, are they less man and more female? Eventually, the only response that we could get to was, I'm a woman because I feel like a woman, because that's who I am. And then we talked about, man, what a difficult question is that? How hard is that? And you are neurotypical, and I'm neurotypical. Two neurotypical people speaking to each other And neither of us have communication issues or social disabilities or any anxieties coming into play, and we can't come up with a better answer than that's because that's who I am. So we spent a great deal of time kind of talking about what the anxieties are, what are her resistance to having a trans child. And, you know, we talked about most of it kind of boiled down to fear, is that she was afraid of her child's experience. So something that I had to work with her on is, well, you know what, you can either be your child's first bully when it comes to their gender identity, or you can be the safe place from the bullies. And we talked about detransition rates. They are as low as 1 to 2%, meaning 1 to 2% of transgender people detransition after transitioning. And the majority of that number detransition due to transphobia, because it's easier to live in the closet in today's world than it is to live out of the closet. We talked about death by suicide rates in transgender children. And we talked about what harm can come from your young child saying they're trans and identifying with a different name. Maybe they changed their hair and their clothing and they asked for different pronouns. What harm is going to come from that if they in fact are wrong and they are cisgender and they explore it and then they figure out, actually, no, this is not who I am? Very little harm, right? And that's something that we talked about, is very little harm can come from that. However, what if, mom, you're wrong and you refuse to affirm your child? A lot of harm can come from that. So that's something that within parent training, ABA parent training, we spent time discussing. Something else that I see is clinics, schools, bathrooms, pretty much anywhere that we're working, they only have the binary bathroom options. So what you can do here, the power of the BCBA or the supervisor, it varies largely across spaces. Some spaces it might be feasible to flip bathroom signage to gender neutral bathrooms. The location, the ethos that you're in, the legality behind the state that you might be in, it all largely comes into play, and how accessible bathrooms are. Some spaces, if you wanted to do this, it would actually require construction because you would have to add spaces to the place that you're in. Whatever bathroom someone should be using, it should be determined by the individual person. So I always check in with that person and ask them, which ones do you want to use? Oftentimes, it comes down to someone needing to decide between the difference of their emotional well-being over their physical safety. And that's usually where that comes in. In the work that I've done directly with my clients, I work with them and help them identify that. And I let them decide. It's a crappy decision, but I let them decide which of these two decisions do we want to make. I had a family where when they were out in the community, something that they started using was an app called Refuge Restroom. And that's an app that'll show based on your location where any gender neutral bathroom might be. So when they were out with their parents somewhere, they could look there and find a bathroom using that. It's largely across the United States. So I did have a participant in my study in Canada where the app just wasn't really helpful because it didn't really show that area. So the parent and the child together started making a list of the places that they frequented to see where gender neutral bathrooms are. Starbucks, for example, typically has one all gender type bathroom. So usually if there's one of those in your area, that's somewhere you can go. In schools, usually the easiest solution is to get access to the faculty bathrooms. However, it's not ideal because I have a participant who was in Georgia that didn't use that faculty bathroom because it was in the office and it required a key. And that kid just didn't feel comfortable asking for the key every time they had to go to the bathroom. So what that child did was restricted eating and drinking during the course of the day, which is not healthy. But that was how they made it through the school day. So that's something that I've come across quite a bit. Then I've also seen that I've had employees, they're easily clocked. What clocked means recognized as transgender. So that means that the person is quickly recognized as transgender just based on our learning history with gender training and gender stereotypes. So an individual should present the way that they feel most comfortable and they feel safest. So open conversations with your supervisees, your technicians, or the people around you, your clients, anyone that you might be supporting is, how can I support you? If somebody misgenders you, do you want me to correct them? How do you want me to do that? Do you want me to ignore it? I had somebody I worked very closely with. We came up with a nonverbal signal because that person said what they wanted changed from minute to minute. Sometimes they wanted it corrected, sometimes they didn't, and they didn't want to do it themselves. So they didn't want to agree to, yes, Gabriella, do it for me every time, or no, Gabriella, ignore it every time. So I would just kind of look at that person and they would give me that nonverbal signal that we had discussed, and then I would do what it was that they asked. So these are just some experiences all year long that we can be doing that are supporting an affirming environment. So next, I want to offer a trigger warning for the next slide. It's going to contain information about conversion therapy. So again, please take care of yourself. Use the help resources that are available to you. So I want to talk about, this is something that we should really be discussing with our supervisees. And if you're not familiar with the 1974 Rikers-Lovaas study, where two behavioral scientists published an article in JABA entitled Behavioral Treatment of Deviant Sex Role Behavior in the Male Child. So the authors named the ways in which a 4-year-old child was engaging in what was called, quote, feminine behaviors. So basically feminine mannerisms, and that those behaviors were not consistent with masculine gender norms. So they justified an intervention, and I'm going to put that in quotes, an intervention, by saying that feminine behaviors by people who are male would result in societal isolation or ridicule. So it was important that they change these child's behaviors. That these behaviors were associated with depression or suicidality or imprisonment or joblessness. And so what they did was, it really is still happening today with our laws, is that we are associating transgender, gender nonconforming, gender non-binary people as being mentally ill, instead of transphobia, homophobia, and the societal oppression creating minority stress, which results in depression, suicidality, joblessness. And then they also said that it was a deviant sex role development in childhood. So they had to prevent a serious form of deviance in adulthood. And then finally, they said it was important to change these behaviors because it disturbed the parents. So the article used punishment systems, and it was a catalyst for modern day conversion therapy. And I think every behavior analyst needs to come to terms with that this is part of our history, and how this is shaping what is happening today to transgender, gender nonconforming individuals, and also come to terms with the fact that the majority of the autistic population also identify with expansive gender identities. So I want to note the influence that the authors had on the field of behavior analysis and how that work is still uplifted in other areas today. Kirk Murphy, that's the name of the participant. He died by suicide later in life. His friends and family and many people from the scientific community placed his forced participation in the study as a factor for his death. So I want to uplift the Beautiful Humans Change cast, as well as Upswing advocates and other fellow behavior analysts that are working to get the article retracted, because it is still available in JABA. There is a note of, quote, concern, but it is still available. So this is definitely a topic that we can be discussing with our supervisees when we are in supervision, and we can talk about how our history has shaped behavior analysis today. So that is the end of that trigger warning. Then I want to just discuss a couple other things in supervision considerations. So in your supervision meetings, you should be discussing current events and national flashpoints. Just across the last 4 years, I'm going to give some examples of the things that I've discussed in supervision. So the murder of George Floyd and then his trial of his murder is something that I discussed. I also want to caveat this with that as a white behavior analyst, the way that I approach these conversations with my Black supervisees as opposed to my non-Black supervisees is different. So my Black supervisees, I want to make sure that they are consenting to the topics of discussion. I'm giving them trigger warnings ahead of time. I might be emailing them and letting them know. And I'm really looking at the kind of relationship that we've cultivated. I had some supervisees where the extent of our discussion has been me saying to them, I know you're showing up today very differently than the rest of us are showing up today. And I'm holding space for you. And I want you to know that, because I know that that supervisee doesn't feel comfortable discussing the racial injustice with their white supervisor. I've had other Black supervisees that have welcomed that discussion and conversation with me. And then I've had non-Black supervisees where this has been something we have discussed in supervision. Anti-transgender bills and discrimination in healthcare, in sports. These are things that I've brought up and discussed with my supervisees. White terrorism in January 6th. That is something that I have included in my supervision meetings. And increased violence against Asian Americans, usually during COVID. We saw a huge spike in that. I also think about the time of year, 9/11, major holidays, Juneteenth. These are all things that I bring into my supervision meetings that we talk about, because we need, as behavior analysts, to recognize learning history, to recognize environmental variables, to recognize the spaces and how people are showing up to those. COVID-19 and the impact on historically marginalized identities. The overturn of Roe versus Wade was a big discussion in a lot of my supervision meetings. And then Free Palestine is something else that has been brought up in my supervision meetings. So I just want to make a note for intersectionality that spaces that are anti-Black are not safe for our LGBTQ plus Black colleagues and clients. Spaces where there is xenophobia is not safe for our Muslim LGBTQ plus clients. So intersectionality speaks to that we are recognizing individuals in all of their identities and as full dimensional human beings, and that we are advocating from an intersectional lens. Lastly, I want to just tell people, obtain mentorship. If you are hearing things today and you're going, I have no idea how to start a conversation like that with my supervisees, get mentorship, training, coaching. There are folks out there that are going to help you do that, that are going to help you shape your supervision. So some final thoughts. I want you to remember impact over intent. Remember that our impact, what we want, and our intentions, our good intentions, we want those to match. But the thing that we really need to be looking at is, are they matching? And if they're not, how do we shift behavior to ensure they do match? All behavior can be changed. If you hope to change anyone else's behavior, you have to be willing to change your own. Be willing to unlearn what you think you know, to unlearn the things that you have assumed. Have a plan to change your behavior and then commit to learning. See it as continuous. So here's my QR code again, so you can scan to connect. And then I haven't had a chance to look at seeing if we had any questions that come in. And then we can start from there. So, okay. Hi, Nichola.
Hi, Gabriella. Well, on behalf of everyone, I'm sure everybody loved that, because I find it extremely interesting and has made me think a little bit differently as well. There are just a few questions actually, so I think you've covered a lot, which is really good. So thank you so much for that. And that glass of water was well deserved, I'm sure. So the first question is from Miranda, and she says, have you ever received any kickback about asking your supervisee to sign a contract?
Oh, okay. So Miranda, good question. So for context, Miranda is not a BCBA, so that's why Miranda is asking this question. So for behavior analysts, in order to get supervision hours, they are required to sign a contract. I've never had kickback about the contract. However, if the question is, have you ever had pushback about somebody signing the specific recommendations that I said? So signing that you agree that we are going to be centering intersectionality, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I personally have never had direct pushback from anyone on that. I have had people that I have sent the contract to who have decided not to move forward with supervision. So whether or not that's because they didn't want the pieces within the contract, whether or not it was another decision or any other reason, I have had folks that have read my contract and or have even met with me and gone over the contract and have ended up saying no, thank you. And I think that that's okay that happens. I would prefer to have somebody recognize a values misalignment and move in another direction rather than I need to address that within supervision. And hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. And we have another one from Katrina McGee, who says, what steps need to be done to get gender affirming care into the ethics code?
What steps need to be done? Oh my goodness. So I do appreciate bringing up the ethics code, because here's the thing about the ethics code, and I've done talks on this. I've done ethics CEUs on this, where we are supposed to be do no harm, affirm and provide affirming environments for our clients. And then we also have an ethics code that says we need to follow local laws, right? And we talked a lot about laws that are in direct opposition of an affirming environment. So what I would say is you want to leverage your privilege in the space that you have. If you have the opportunity to provide that feedback, which most of us do almost on a yearly basis, to provide feedback to the BACB, that you do that. They are constantly asking for people to come to Colorado at the BACB headquarters as a subject matter expert. So if you are serving in that space, this is a time where you could utilize your privilege to talk about that. I would also say that you want to look at what other professions are doing, like social work and psychologists, because they also are seeing the exact same things that we are as behavior analysts, where they are writing calls to action, they are writing letters. They are looking at some of our bigger supporters and our bigger organizations, like ABAI would be a bigger organization, APBA would be a bigger organization, where we are asking them to start writing position statements and to start saying directly what needs to be said, because we have folks who are working with kids that are going, I don't know what to do here. Because if I'm looking just at the ethics code, I'm in opposition one way or another. So I would say that those are some of the initial steps that you could take. I would also say that you're not the first person to talk about it and to start doing that. So I would say follow Upswing Advocates, the Behavior Change podcast. Those folks are already doing work in that area.
I'm sorry, I put myself on mute there. This one is from Jamie, and Jamie says, more of a comment. This was an excellent presentation, which we all will be in agreement with that one. And I do have a question from Grace, and Grace says, now this could be something maybe you aren't able to answer, Gabby, but we'll see, because it's specific to a client. I have a client who is telling peers that he can't be friends with gay people because he is homophobic. This is coming from the parents. The client is likely not straight himself. He came out as behavior technician years ago. I am not sure how to approach this with very conservative religious parents, and it's limiting his ability to make friends in high school, and I'm also concerned for his well-being.
Okay. So I'll give some general thoughts on that. So I would say that what you're seeing, especially since that client that you're thinking is probably part of the community themselves, you're probably seeing a lot of that internalized homophobia, transphobia that comes from minority stress. So what I would say there, I would say approaching it from several different avenues, is that approaching it with the family, and I saw that you said, how do I approach this with the family? They're very conservative, they're very religious. So what I say when anyone asks me that, is I say, weigh very carefully whether or not a conversation is going to prohibit your access to that client. So if you think by bringing up this discussion with parents that they will be so resistant that they will limit your access to the client, then I personally would choose not to do that, because I also know that the statistic of one affirming adult in a child's life reduces the rate of suicide by 40%. So almost half. So I always say that to folks. I said the same thing to a participant's mother who wanted to address it with a homophobic parent of a child's friend. And I said the same thing. If you are going to make it so this parent restricts access to you and your child, you're not going to be able to be that one accepting adult in that child's life. So I would say that from that perspective, whether or not you want to address it with the family, I would go very carefully, because if you are going to be affirming for that child in that space, even though they're currently resistant, you have the potential to really reduce the rate of suicide there. Beyond that, I would say that with that particular child, whether or not somebody is internalizing some of those homophobic or transphobic feelings, an individual should not be given any sort of permission to hurt somebody else or to be homophobic or transphobic. So I would say, from a direction of what our mutual agreements are for space, you will not say these things in spaces that I share with you. You will not do these things in spaces that I share with you. You will not do or say these things with other people, because you don't get to cause harm. You don't get to do those things. If the child themselves, it sounded like you said, is recognizing I shouldn't be around these people because I'm hurting them, then I would agree with that child. If you can't be in a space and around someone without hurting them, then you probably shouldn't be around them. So I would actually affirm the child in that statement and say, you know what, I would agree with you. I think that you aren't a safe friend to be for somebody else. And what I would say also, what I've done with other families and with other kids, I had a family where it was the sibling was trans and the other sibling was autistic. And I said to the parents, I know that your autistic child is being very resistant to this transition, but I also want you to be aware of this statistic when it comes to autistic identity. So even though your autistic child is cisgender, they will likely be in community with a lot of trans and gender non-binary people. So not only do they need to learn how to be affirming for their sibling, this is also the community that they will be at school with, that they will be around. So at a minimum, you need to learn how to be affirming, or at least not be harmful to these people. So I would say that you might want to move in a direction of how to not overtly be transphobic or homophobic, or avert behaviors that you could be avoiding, and work on that with that child.
Okay, and we have one from Sandeep. Hi, Sandeep. Haven't seen you in a while. Have you experienced having to healthily challenge external professionals, for example, when they misgender a client of yours, and how did they welcome this?
Oh, yes, quite a bit. So especially teachers, I see that quite a bit with teachers. I see that quite a bit with, I had a family once where it was an occupational therapist. So with the occupational therapist, I never actually was directly in any meetings with that person. Any interaction was kind of facilitated through the parent. And eventually what I said to the family is, I'm recommending that you consider finding a new occupational therapist, because sending your child into a space with someone who is continuously misgendering this child is creating a really unsafe space for your kid. So I'm going to recommend that you consider moving to another professional. When it's school, there's very little options for parents in terms of limiting access. So I have been in meetings with folks where I'm in the IEP meeting, and I am given the IEP report, and it has the dead name of the child, which is the name that was assigned to them at birth. And I have been in meetings where I said, you know what, we're going to wait for you to fix this. And I don't think we can start this meeting until that's fixed on paper. And I've literally said, I'm not ready to participate in this meeting. I think that, go ahead and fix that, and we can get started when you have that for everyone. I've had pushback from schools that say we have to use their legal name in the IEP. And I've said, well, I don't agree. I don't believe that is true. I would love for you to show me the policy that says that that's required. However, I'm going to say that instead, what you need to do is put student, and you can use their initials throughout, and that shouldn't be a problem. I have been in meetings where I continuously stop and correct someone to use the correct language, and I've said, no, it's he, or I correct the name, and I do that every time. And I've directly said in meetings, I'm very concerned that it is June, and that this child has been seeing you every day since June, and you are still calling them this name. And usually the response is, well, it's just hard. I'm used to it. And I'm typically just very direct and said, you know what? I have some suggestions that can help you get out of the habit of using this name. However, it's been 10 months. And that should be concerning to everyone, that it's been 10 months and you are still making this many mistakes. Now we're moving in a direction where I showed a bill where it's in the state of Arizona, and Arizona is not the only one with that bill, but it's my personal religious beliefs. I can't call you that name. And now there is a bill in Arizona that says professionals can do that. So in that case, I have a lot of really difficult conversations with families. And again, remember intersectionality, socioeconomic status should factor into your discussion. I tell families, if you can move, move. If you can do it, move. I had a participant to my study in Georgia. That is just not feasible. The socioeconomic status would not allow that. So instead, we've started looking at homeschool programs that would potentially be affordable, and started looking at other avenues for people where that is affordable. Hopefully that answers your question.
Brilliant, I think so. And then we have one last one from Kirsten, and she says, do you have a reference you can share for that stat you just gave about having an affirming adult in youth life reduces suicide risk by 40%?
Yes, that's from the Trevor Project. So just go on the trevorproject.com, and they have all of those statistics there for you.
And Gemma has put in, just in case Gabriella doesn't know the reference. There you go. Thank you, Gemma.
Thanks, Gemma. Yep.
So on that note, Gabriella, there are no other questions, and I'd just like to thank you for giving your time for such a really informative and interesting webinar. And as your PhD supervisor, I'm so proud. I know that we had to disable the chat box because of the numbers and things, but the vibe and from the questions, as you can see, people are impressed and really enthused about what you've just presented. And we're very lucky to have you, and we're going to be seeing you soon in Belfast. And on behalf of everyone, thanks so much for attending. All of the 4 checks for the CEUs popped up, and you should be able to access your certificate should you need it. And this is going to be recorded. So on behalf of the Centre for Behaviour Analysis at Queen's University Belfast, Gabriella, thanks so much. And thanks everyone else for attending too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.